The Candleman's Daughter by A.M. Blackmere. No one in their right mind renders tallow at midnight. But Merritt's father had never claimed saintliness, and Merritt herself had not slept well since the first plague cart rattled down the street. And Merritt herself had not slept well since the first plague cart rattled down the street. Tonight, the fat in the big copper kettle swelled and shuddered as if remembering its former life. The heat coaxed out a stench that was equal parts butcher's bin and candlelit sanctuary. Merritt, arm aching from the paddle, watched the slow spiral of scum lap the rim. Her right eye watered from the smoke. She blinked it clear and scraped down the kettle, careful to keep the fire even. The trick was in the rendering. Never too hot, never too cold, or the batch would go sour and seep. She could almost hear her father's voice, guttering and low. "You see how it goes, Milky? That's the Morrow greed. Burn it out and you keep what's useful." His advice, as with most things, lingered even after his body had gone brittle and blue, collapsed behind the workbench yesterday at none but the Lord and Merritt to witness. Merritt had watched him tuck it under the crook of his elbow after every visit from the cathedral men. She'd never been permitted to peek. "Dangerous little turd, a book," he'd snort. But tonight, alone with the kettle and the ledger, she felt compelled. She wiped her hands and unlatched the clasp. The columns ran as neat as altar rails, dates, weights, names. Merritt traced a thumb down the latest entries. Mother Joran, it read, with a number next to it, and the word examined. Then, Old Riska wept. Then, Arvid Sonson refused, then returned, then a final line, settled. The rest of the names swam, smudged by the grease of his thumb or her own. Each bore a date. She recognized them from the bellman's daily chant. The dead, the nearly dead, the pox-blind, and the heart-cold. The next column bore symbols that Merritt did not know, though she saw them repeated with enough rhythm to suspect a cipher. A cross, and then a knife. A cross, then a knife, then the neat little spiral of a snail shell. The last page was blank. Merritt pressed her palm against it, half expecting the paper to pulse. The fat hissed in the kettle, spitting at the heat. She shut the ledger and shoved it under the bench, next to the bundle of tallow stiffened rags and still held the shape of her father's hands. Next to the bundle of tallow stiffened rags that still held the shape of her father's hands. The job would not wait. It was the bishop's commission, paid for in silver and threats, and due before matins. Merritt poured the stained tallow into the mold, careful not to spill. At the bottom of the jar, a clot of something pale and stringy trembled, a slub of old body, refusing to dissolve. She fished it out with the paddle and buried it in a scoop of ash from the hearth. By dawn, the candles stood cool and spectral, their tappers long as a child's arm, wicks still damp at the tips. She lined them up on the sill, just as he had done, and waited for the chill to harden them. From the windows, she watched the city's slow, sickening breath, red suns swelling above roofs, bell towers shivering in its own shadow. Someone screamed, muffled by walls and fog. Merritt ignored it. She packed the candles in a crate, wrapping each in a shred of linen. There was no time for prayers. The bishop's man would come with the hour, and if the candles were not ready, there would be more than a ledger to settle. Merritt whipped her face and slipped out into the alley, cloaked drawn tight. The city street was thick with the white crust of frost and the sweet, mealy stink of rot. Doors painted with tar crosses, rats leaping from gutter to gutter. The cathedral loomed at the end of the street, its doors gaping. Merritt ducked beneath the arch and hurried through the nave, careful to keep to the shadows. At the altar rail, a priest waited, his breath fogging in the cold. "You," he said. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. "For the bishop?" The priest's fingers were red and raw, nails gnawed. He opened the crate and sifted through the candles, one by one. "You've mixed the marrow in." It was not a question. She shrugged. "It's all I have." He grunted and set the crate on the step. "We'll see if they last through Vespers." Merritt turned to leave, but the priest caught her by the wrist. "There's more," he muttered. His thumb pressed the inside of her arm, hunting for something beneath the skin. "A name got left off. There's a price for missing names." She jerked free. "That's all of them." The priest looked at her, one pale brow lifted. "No," he said. "Not all." Then he turned, cradling the crate like a sick child, and shuffled into the side chapel where votives flickered in stagnant air. Merritt followed at a distance, kept to the shadows of the ambulatory. The cold inside the cathedral was crueler than the street, gone brittle in the high stone vaults. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the churn of hunger. It was not the priest's business what she had put in the tallow. Besides, didn't the book say every body was dust and every soul a wick? She doubted the bishop would care, so long as the candles burned. At the lady's altar, the priest set out the first taper. It looked wrong in the red morning light, the color of old bone. He struck a flint, hissed the wick to flame. The candle caught, but then the flame forked and guttered, a thread of blue smoke leaking down the shaft. The wax began to weep. Not melt, weep. Merritt watched in silence as little beads of yellowed fat welled up from within, clinging to the candle's sides like cold sweat. The priest stared too. The air smelled foul, like marrow boiled wrong, like something inside out. For a moment, Merritt thought that the priest would drop the candle and flee, but instead he cupped his hand around the flame, coaxed it upright. The wax thickened, then slowed, revealing a seam at the heart of the taper. A thin pink filament running dead center. Merritt's breath hitched. He'd noticed it too. Another moment, and the priest pinched the wick and the candle snuffed, splitting clean down the length. The priest dug his thumb inside until he drew out a single hair, long and red-brown. Her hair. She remembered the bundle of rags, the slub of tissue in the kettle. Her father had always told her waste not, want not, and she had learned not to look too close at what went into the pot. But now her scalp tingled, and the priest's eyes were on her. "You put yourself in the candles," his voice suddenly low. She drew herself up, lied with her teeth. It was in the fat. I never saw it." He smiled, a twisted thing. "It's a grave crime, girl. Blood to blood." Merritt's pulse hammered in her temples. She thought of the ledger, her father's scrawled marks, the tally of secrets and debts. The knowledge weighed on her tongue, and she tasted ash. "I can make more," she said. The priest twisted the hair around his finger. "Let it dangle. He'll want to see you again. He'll want to see you again." Her knees ached. "Then let me finish the order." The priest's tongue worked behind his teeth, greedy for words. "Tomorrow at dawn, Bishop's vestry." He thrust the candle at her, the broken wick twitching like a worm, and turned away. Merritt palmed the candle's halves, sticky with her own residue. The seam where her hair ran looked almost like a vein, pulsing faintly, as if something inside the wax was alive and waiting. She pressed the pieces together, but the seam would not seal. The next batch would need purer tallow. or a better lie. The cold hit harder as she stepped into the nave. Light knifed through the high glass, splintering into blue and yellow panes. The city outside had moved on. Another cart trundled past, and two sisters swept sand into the gutters. Merritt slipped through the side door, tucked the broken candle into her sleeve, and doubled back to the alley. Frost caught in her breath, sharp as bone dust. Her mind churned. The ledger, her father's sly remarks, the priest's hungry stare, her own hair, her own blood, baked into the bishop's candles. There was a rule, she remembered. Never feed the church what you won't eat yourself. But she was all marrow and string now, and the city was hollowing out, day by day. At the workshop, she threw herself at the ledger, eyes burning from lack of sleep and the acid stink of tallow. The cipher taunted her. She hunched over the columns, scratching each line with her father's gnawed-up pencil, trying to fit it all together. Each cross, each knife, each spiral, what church code could it be? Or was it something older? Older than the city? Older than the bones that boiled for the bishop's candles? She tried the letters as numbers, then as months. She shaded symbols into patterns, following the spiral, always returning to the same few names. Her own never listed. Never until now. A knock at the workshop door, echoed by a second, heavier blow. Open. The voice behind it was not the priest's, nor the bishop's. Merritt hesitated, weighing the candle halves in one hand and the ledger in the other. She jammed the candle inside her apron and slid the ledger onto the shelf, then cracked the door. It was a sister, face buried in the cowl, nose and lips mottled with blue from the cold. "There's a summons," she croaked, eyes roving over Merritt's shoulder to the cluttered workbench. For tonight, Bishop's vestry." Merritt nodded. "I heard." "Bring the book," the sister whispered, thin mouth splitting in a smile. "They're waiting." Merritt shut the door and pressed her forehead to the timber. The ledger was heavier than lead now, the columns and ciphers like prayers gone wrong. She tied her cloak, checked the candle halves one last time, and slipped the ledger beneath her arm with the care of a thief or a mourner. Outside, dusk had curdled the sky to bruise. She walked fast, not daring to look anywhere but ahead, feet numb within her shoes. She did not see the boy who trailed her, not until he grabbed her sleeve at the cathedral close, and even then she did not flinch, just swung the ledger to her chest, bracing for a blow. But the boy only shook his head, urgent, sunken eyes darting to the stained glass above. "Don't," he said. "They're saying you've got the bishop's curse." She bared her teeth. "I've got nothing but work." He laughed, a dry snap. "Only a fool brings herself to the altar now. Run. You see what they do to the ones whose names get left off." Merritt almost thanked him, almost let the ledger fall where it wanted, but the night pressed on and the vestry doors were wide. She crept up the steps, mindful of every echo. Inside, the cathedral men waited. The priest, the bishop, come down from his high seat, towering in funeral black. Two more sisters stood at either elbow, hands folded, eyes like wet stones. The bishop drew her in with a single finger, and Merritt, despite herself, obeyed. He did not ask her name. He did not ask her to kneel. He only gestured at her arms, and the priest stepped forward, spreading a cloth to catch what might fall. "Your father's debt was plain," the bishop said, voice as smooth and fat. voice as smooth and fat as rendered the rendered wax. But you have exceeded it. She clutched the ledger. There was more in the fat than you ever knew, she said, barely above a whisper. The bishop's mouth twisted, a wet crease. There always is. The priest held out his hands, palms empty, waiting for an offering. Merritt stared at the ledger. She ran her thumb along the cover, feeling the worn spots where her father's sweat had salted the leather. She could give it up now. The whole account of the dead, the tally of marrow and ash, every hungry debt the church had ever conscripted from her family. Or she could lie and try to keep something for herself. She looked up, saw the bishop's eyes, small and hooded in his folds of flesh. She waited with the patience of stone. Merritt pressed the ledger to her chest. My father always has said, the candles are prayers made honest, she said, her voice scraping raw. But these, she held out the broken halves of the candle, seam pulsing in the cold. They aren't honest. They're a curse. The bishop flicked his eyes to the wax, then shrugged. Honesty is a luxury for the healthy. You'll render what you're told, girl, or you'll join the tally. The threat hung there, sour as bile. Merritt knew she would have to choose, and soon. Hand over the ledger and give the bishop every secret her father had ever cooked into grease, or burn it all, the workshop and the book and the last of the tallow, and go nameless like the ones whose debts had never made the ledger's neat rows. She waited just long enough for the bishop to gesture to the sisters. Then she ran. The nave echoed with her footfalls, the candle halves slick in her fist, the ledger tight against her ribs. She did not see it if they followed. She did not care. Frost on the stones made her slip, but she caught herself and kept going past the staring saints, through the hush of the incense and old bones. Down the alley, past the plague carts and the guttering lamps, she let the cold strip her face raw. The city was quieter now. No bellman, no chant, just the hush of things waiting to die. The boy with the sunken eyes watched her from a stoop, and she did not slow, did not give him her name or her fear. At the end of the street, her workshop hunched in its own shadow, the copper kettle dark and cold. She slammed the door behind her. The ledger fell to the floor, splitting open to that last blank page. The air inside was heavy with the ghost of old fat, but there, on the workbench, was a candle still burning from the morning's batch. A sick, slack flame eating its way down the shaft. Merritt stared at it, the way the wick burned crooked, the way it bled small tears of yellow wax. In its flicker, she saw her mother's face, her father's. The long line of names that never made it past the ledger's margin. She pinched the guttering wick with thumb and forefinger, snuffed it to a reek. Through the haze, something moved. A silhouette in the window? Merritt struck a match and relit the candle, watching the new flame twitch and spit. The air seemed thinner, more eager, as if the room itself knew what she was meant to do. She took the candle, still burning, and crossed to the faded curtain her father had always kept drawn over the back wall. Behind it, his cot, the bundle of rags, the last of the secrets he'd ever bothered to keep. Merritt heard her own breath rasp as she lifted the curtain's edge with one hand. Flame held steady in the other. Thank you so much for listening to my narration of this wonderful story. Don't forget to support the author, which I have linked in the description, as well as the original story. And I just want to give a quick shout out to my patrons Scott, Old Penguin, Ellie Hutmeyer, Mr. Sankofa, Austin My Love, Rinku Star, William Hartley, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Eric Cifuentes, Lawrence Wallen, and Melissa Perez. I also try to link a different charity or a different cause every month and maybe a little more. So don't forget to check out the description to support the author of the story you just listened to and to maybe help somebody else out, even if it's just $1. As always, if you guys have a prayer request, please let me know in the comments, shoot me a message on Discord. I would love to know how I can be praying for you. Thank you guys so much. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.